There was once a man who was born in a land of mountains, where the people are self-sufficient and live close to the earth. All his life he dreamed and investigated his own dreams and other people's. Patience came to him to try to understand the wisdom of dreams. He was a successful psychiatrist who never ceased to speak of the soul, mythology, and God. He was a scientist, a scholar, and a traveller, and always a dreamer. His dreams have changed our ideas. Before he died, he said, "My work will be continued by those who suffer." His name was Carl Gustav Jung. The American psychoanalyst Dr. Joseph Henderson first met Jung in the 1930s.
It was more wonderful than I had expected even. A wonderful man to work with, tremendous experience to work with, to meet Jung. It's almost impossible to describe what that was like. A kind of union of a Swiss peasant and a scholar and something more, of a more spiritual nature. It describes a man that technically should not exist, but did.
We all dream, just as we all breathe. Throughout history, humankind has been intrigued by dreams and woken by nightmares. More than any man or woman before him, Carl Jung worked to understand where dreams came from and what meaning or purpose they had. Jung's task was immense, to define and understand the conscious and unconscious human personality.
The whole personality of man is indescribable. His consciousness can be described. His unconscious cannot be described because the unconscious, as I must repeat myself, is always unconscious. And is really unconscious. It really does not know it.
Does not know about it.
And so we don't know our unconscious personality. We have hints. We have certain ideas, but we don't know it really. Nobody can say where man ends. That is the beauty of it, you know.
Yeah.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
The unconscious of man can reach God knows where. There we are going to make discoveries.
Jung made a host of discoveries. His work begins in dreams, but it lives in the real world. He was a scholar whose determination to understand his own dreams has given millions of people around the world a new insight into their own psychology, their dreams, and their relationships. Jung himself used to retreat from his family and his patients to the tower which he built for himself on the shore of Lake Zurich at Bollingen. The tower became the focus of his introspection and his creativity.
Here at Bollingen, Jung found a piece of land that was really alone and untouched and did not have that sense of being encroached upon by neighbors. Once you got there, it was like being in a different world. It's as though Jung had chosen this place to symbolize and represent his own belief in the integrity of the individual to find his own space.
Jung was an original. He was also a loner, even in childhood. In his autobiography, written when he was in his 80s, he said,
"I played alone, daydreamed or strolled in the woods alone, and had a secret world of my own. The pattern of my relationship to the world was already prefigured. Today as then, I am as solitary, because I know things and must hint at things which other people do not know, and usually do not want to know."
Jung's work began with the experiences of his own inner life. His dreams led him to pursue medicine and psychiatry. His analytical psychology was never a scientific theory, but was the result of observing the inner life of his patients and the human quest for meaning through religion and mythology of all cultures. This house in Fasnacht near Zurich was where he studied, painted, received visitors, and saw patients. One of those who arrived on his doorstep and became his patient and later an analyst himself was a 26-year-old American, Joe Wheelwright.
We didn't choose our profession.
Our profession chose us, but what we knew was that we were as neurotic as hell, and we better run, not walk, to the nearest analyst. In those days, nobody went into analysis with the thoughts of becoming an analyst themselves. I tried by trial and error all these different things, music and teaching and all that stuff and writing. And all the bells were ringing and the green lights were flashing. And I realized that this was my calling. This was it. This is what I call God Albert, and this is what Albert had in mind for me, you know. And I better go along. And so I said, I would like to be an analyst. And Jung threw his hands up and he said, "Oh, God." It happens over and over again. And the patients say, "Oh, yes, I want to do what you do." I said, "Oh, hell, I'm not that conceited. I don't suppose, I mean, I do in a sense, but of course I couldn't do it as well as you, Herr Geheimrat, sir, you know." But and he said, "Well, it's too bad." And I said, "No, but this is real. I'm different." To which he replied, he loved American slang, and he replied, "I'll bet."
Dr. Dieter Baumann is one of Jung's grandsons and is a Jungian analyst himself, practicing in Zurich.
He was not that kind of adult who would take an air of authority or superiority, had an absolutely natural authority. But he also initiated me as a boy, you know, as a 10-year-old or 11-year-old boy or so. He initiated me to drinking and to smoking. Yeah. I mean, he was that way.
In a bad mood, he could be quite unpredictable and rather frightening because he had a way of losing his temper about certain things that you had no way of understanding. But as soon as he had let himself go and expressed his anger or distress or whatever it was, he then immediately got to work to find out what was behind it. And out would come something usually very helpful and curative both for him and for the situation.
From his earliest childhood, he memorized and explored his own dreams and fantasies. He thought it was worth knowing what dreams were and what useful information they might contain. He was the first modern psychologist to believe that dreams were creative and relevant in understanding events in our real life. Before going to Basel University, Jung was torn between studying archaeology and anthropology or the sciences. He allowed his conviction in the wisdom of dreams to decide.
In the first dream, I was in a dark wood that stretched along the Rhine. I came to a little hill, a burial mound, and began to dig. After a while, I turned up, to my astonishment, some bones of prehistoric animals. This interested me enormously, and at that moment I knew I must get to know nature, the world in which we lived, and the things around us. Then came a second dream. Again I was in a wood. It was threaded with watercourses, and in the darkest place I saw a circular pool surrounded by dense undergrowth. Half immersed in the water lay the strangest and most wonderful creature, a round animal shimmering in opalescent hues, and consisting of innumerable little cells or of organs shaped like tentacles. It aroused in me an intense desire for knowledge, so that I awoke with a beating heart. These two dreams decided me overwhelmingly in favor of science and removed all my doubts.
As an analyst, Jung's method was to treat dreams as facts, which the doctor or scientist could observe. Dr. Gerhard Adler, who edited Jung's collected works and letters, had his own experience of Jung's practical attitude towards the psyche.
My first interview with Jung was very significant. I had a dream the night before in which I traveled to India. I saw this great triangle of India, and I landed somewhere on the coast. I told this dream to Jung, and instead of analyzing, he took a large atlas out and sat down with me, knelt down with me on the chair, and said, "Oh, show me, where did you travel? Where did you travel? Show me." This was extremely important to me. It showed me immediately that the reality of the psyche.
Dr. Marie-Louise von Franz is an analyst whose work has covered almost as wide a span as Jung's own, on alchemy, fairy tales, dream symbols, mythology and science. Now seriously ill, Dr. von Franz recalls her very first encounter with Jung and his insistence upon the reality of the psyche.
He talked about a crazy girl and said she was on the moon, and talked about it as if it had been very real, and being rational I was indignant and said she hasn't been on the moon, and Jung says yes she has. And I thought that cannot be. I said that satellite of the earth there which is uninhabited, she hasn't been there. And he just looked at me and said she has been on the moon. And I thought that old man is crazy or I am stupid. And then it suddenly dawned on me that he meant that what happened psychically is absolutely real to the one to whom it happens. So I suddenly realized the reality of the psyche.
The girl was 18 years old and came from a cultivated family. At the age of 15, she had been seduced by her brother and abused by a schoolmate. From her 16th year on, she retreated into isolation. She told me that she had lived on the moon. As a result of the incest, she felt humiliated in the eyes of the world, but elevated in the realm of fantasy. The consequence was complete alienation from the world, a state of psychosis. She became extra-mundane, as it were, and lost contact with humanity. By telling me her story, she had in a sense betrayed the demon and attached herself to an earthly human being. Hence, she was able to return to life and even to marry. Thereafter, I regarded the sufferings of the mentally ill in a different light, for I had gained insight into the richness and importance of their inner experience.
To the psychotic patient, the moon visit was real. By taking it seriously and forming a human bond with the girl, Jung enabled her to return into the world of concrete reality from which she had fled. Ultimately, the psychosis subsided. Jung's approach to the reality of the psyche was innovative and unique. Jung was a typical Swiss citizen at heart, happiest among the lakes and mountains. On summer afternoons, he would sail on Lake Zurich as he considered his research into psychological illness and the vivid material in his patients' dreams. His deeply rooted feeling for the Swiss landscape balanced his efforts to gain a clearer insight into the workings of the unconscious mind. Until late in life, he would go driving up into the mountains. As a child, Jung went with his father to Mount Ricci near Lucerne. Having only enough money for one ticket, Paul Jung sent his son on the mountain railway alone. Standing on the mountaintop, Jung later wrote that he felt himself to be in God's world. The reality of the psyche underpinned all Jung's work, and such was its impact that it brought new words into our everyday language. It was Jung who first used the terms extrovert and introvert, and the word persona for the mask which hides our true self. He coined the word synchronicity for his theory of meaningful coincidence. With Freud, he alerted us to our complexes and made us aware of an unconscious dimension beneath concrete experience. He defined the unconscious thus.
Everything of which I know, but of which I'm not at the moment thinking. Everything of which I was once conscious, but have now forgotten. Everything perceived by my senses, but not noted by my conscious mind. Everything which, involuntarily and without paying attention to it, I feel, think, remember, want, and do. All future things that are taking shape in me, and will sometime come to consciousness. All this is the content of the unconscious.
The research comes to the question of the unconscious. There things become necessarily blurred, because the unconscious is something which is really unconscious. So you have no object, you see nothing. No. You only can make inferences, you know. And so we have to create a model of this possible structure of the unconscious, because we can't see it.
To this end, Jung developed the word association test, the most familiar of all psychological testing devices, which provided a means of locating what he chose to call a complex.
Kopf.
Hals.
The test requires the patient to say a word in immediate response to the doctor's stimulus word. The speed of response and the patient's pulse and respiration were measured at the same time. Jung's innovation was to consider why some test words cause patients to hesitate or to become anxious.
And then I began to study these places in the experiment where the attention or the capability, apparently, of the test person began to waver or to disappear. And I found soon out that it is matter of intimate personal affairs people were thinking of, or which were in them, even if they momentarily did not think of them, when they were unconscious, with other words, that nevertheless an inhibition came from the unconscious and hindered the expression in speech.
That's exactly the beginning of the whole development of Jungian psychology, when he did this word association test and discovered that there were strange interferences from somewhere else or somebody else in the way in which we try to react, to answer. And therefore he began to call this a complex.
Fenster.
Offen.
Much of what we had hitherto regarded as senseless was not as crazy as it seemed. More than once I have seen that even with such patients, there remains in the background a personality which must be called normal. It stands looking on, so to speak.
Reich.
Arm.
Dr. Jeffrey Satinover is a psychiatrist and Jungian analyst in Stamford, Connecticut in the United States. With computer technology, he can measure the functioning of the brain far more precisely than Jung was able to do 80 years ago. His use of visual or verbal stimulus and an electronic picture of the brain's response, timed in microseconds, represent a high-technology descendant of Jung's word association test.
Basically, what Jung did with the word association experiment was use a stimulus and then measure physiological responses as they correlated to psychological responses. So at the same time that he was taking careful note of the patient's associations, the thinking that was taking place cognitively, he was also observing pulse, respiratory rate, the volume of blood in the finger, and skin conductivity, all of which are essentially measures of anxiety. He didn't conceptualize it that way at the time, but basically what he was doing was identifying the physiological components of an anxious reaction.
Yes, that's right.
The polygraph or lie detector test is also derived from Jung's pioneering work. The word association test conclusively identified the existence of an unconscious voice, separate from a person's conscious mental processes.
What it reveals is that the physiology of the individual is a separate entity from the ego. So it's as though a second personality is standing behind me when I'm taking the lie detector test. And you ask me a question that I don't want to acknowledge, and I'll say no, and the man standing behind me will say, oh yes, that's what the physiological response does. So it tells us, just in irrefutable terms, that there is a second entity, a second psychic center in the human psyche, and it's interested in truth.
Psychological truth is revealed in dreams, too, and in rituals like the annual Fasnacht. All over Switzerland, especially in Basel, Swiss order gives way to the disorder of the piccolos, the fifes and drums, the confusion and colour of a vivid Lenten carnival, a carnival of truth. Analyst Gerhard Adler.
It tells us the truth, that the real depths of the human psychology, which is usually hidden. If you take the proverbially reticent Swiss, suddenly it breaks out. Suddenly it is something there that one wouldn't expect. But it is, of course, the truth. These are really very wild people.
For the proverbially reticent Swiss, Fasnacht is a license for misbehavior. Jung first encountered Fasnacht as a medical student in Basel, and later took some of his friends and pupils to witness firsthand this eruption of the national unconscious, revealing perhaps the true identity of the Swiss.
Well, true identity in the unconscious sense, they had a side to themselves or a layer to themselves, which usually didn't come out. And it wasn't this orgastic experience of the wild Fasnacht, where they could let themselves go.
For Dieter Baumann, as for his grandfather Jung, the Fasnacht scene was an appealing, free expression of the Swiss unconscious.
At a given point, I think it has also to do with my age, I bought myself a piccolo and I started to practice, and then I started to go. I like the music and the whole love and skill and pain people take to create Fasnacht.
In Basel, dozens of studios are devoted to the painstaking craft of styling and painting new masks each year. Jung made the psychological observation that in daily life, in every culture, people wear a kind of mask, which he called our persona. The original meaning of the Latin word persona was an actor's mask.
So the persona is partially the result of the demands society has. And on the other side, it is a compromise with what one likes to be, or with what, or as one likes to appear. Say. Yeah. Now, this is not the real personality, in spite of the fact that people will assure you that that is all quite real and quite honest. Yet it is not. Now, such a performance, or say, the performance of the persona is quite all right, as long as you know that you are not identical with the way in which you appear.
A ritual like Fasnacht allows the unconscious truth of the individual personality to emerge. At Fasnacht, everyone is masked. In their masks, they may insult their friends or colleagues by telling them the kinds of truths which for the rest of the year they might suppress. It is the opposite of the mask which we normally wear in order to take our place in the world.
We were masked all the time, and we had to get behind the mask. We had to realize that we had the mask. Persona was also, on the other hand, something necessary, because we can't jump with our true being at everybody. We have to be careful.
When Jung's party visited Basel, they got up at 3 in the morning to witness the Morgenstreik. As 4 o'clock approaches, In the February cold, all the streetlights are turned out, and as the cathedral bells strike the hour, lanterns are lit, the bands begin to march and to play their fife and drums. With each band clashing against the others, the traditional pagan music drowns out the cold, and the lanterns swirl their satire in the darkness. This is the Morgenstreik, which ushers in 3 days of Fasnacht revelry.
I happened to be in the army then, and I was in the barrack. It was a former monastery on the other side of the Rhine, and I was awaked by the so-called Morgenstreich, which is the beat of the morning, meaning the drum beat. And I went to the window, and in the distance I saw the middle Rhine bridge, and on the bridge these circulating lights, which went from one side to the other and vice versa. Very, do you say eerie, or is that the word? Like elves coming out of the ground of the town. And it was drums and fifes, and these lights, these spirits.
In the early hours, the streets are filled with the noise and images of a crowded dream. As day breaks, the masks and costumes can be seen more clearly. The carnival weaves its way through the streets like an impromptu congress of fairy tale characters. As the light comes up, so the dream fades. Masks are discarded or replaced by the more familiar mask of persona, allowing Basel's everyday business to resume for the morning as if nothing has happened. The Fasnacht main parade invades the streets later in the day. There are marching bands playing what is called googie music, a raucous brass cacophony played deliberately out of tune. The participants belong to cliques, which every year decide upon a theme for their masks, their lanterns, and the huge heads which lead the bands through the streets. Cliques may be formed from a group of friends, from professional groups like waiters or industrial scientists, and there are a number of all-women cliques. Local politics, ecology, television personalities, or elaborate cultural jokes are all pitched into the carnival of propaganda.
What is particularly interesting, I think, about the Basler Fasnacht is that there are so many so-called Wackis. The figure of the Wackis is the Alsatian peasant. They have a very earthy character, I should say, and very funny and, of course, very grotesque. And I have the impression nature here reminds psychically that actually we are peasants and should take care of the earth.
To Jung's grandson, Dieter Baumann, the Wackis reflect a lost sense of connection to the environment. To Jung, such ritualized performance expressed the true primitive unconscious beneath the technocratic persona of Switzerland and of Basel.
It is the spirit of the dead who become alive again. It's the ancestral spirit. One cannot really explain it, but an aspect is certainly that the unconscious comes out. And on one hand, it is a reconnection with the heathen past and with the natural past. And I think the Fasnacht is an unconscious religion.